what's really frustrating for a lot of leaders that I speak with, myself included, is everything that we're taught usually starts in business with the team that stays together the longest is the team that wins. And if you ask any business leader today, do you think the trend of people staying shorter and shorter is going to change, that we're going to see people start to in the future stay in organizations longer? Nobody thinks that trend's going to happen, right? Tesla is worth more than Ford, Honda, Toyota, Mercedes, BMW combined. And they just, haven't even celebrated their 30th birthday. They're run by a guy who's got like 7 part-time jobs, is taking over the world. Yeah. And yet they're able to innovate a lot faster than these companies that have been doing it for 100 years. Why? Because they brought in new people, because they have new ways of solving problems. And it's
managing a global team is complex, but Deel makes it simpler with payroll, HR, IT, and compliance all in one place. That's why over 35,000 businesses trust Deel to hire, pay, and manage teams worldwide. See how Deel works at DEEL.com/NICKDAY. That's Deel.com/NickDay. Deel, your forever people platform. Hello and welcome back to the HR L&D podcast, where we explore the people-powered strategies that are truly shaping the future of work, learning, and leadership. I'm your host. My name is Nick Day. I'm CEO at JGA Recruitment Group. We're specialist human resources recruiters with offices in the USA and in the UK, but we do recruit globally should you have any challenging HR positions that you need support with. Now, today we're going to be talking about trust. We're going to be talking about job fluidity, culture, the future of work, and how to build organizations where people don't just perform, but they really belong. And we know belonging is something that is such a critical component of business performance. And to help us navigate this conversation today is someone who's helped build one of the most iconic company cultures in Silicon Valley, and that's Steve Cadigan, LinkedIn's first CHRO. He's a globally recognized thought leader, some amazing keynote speakers. I highly recommend you go to his site and look at his speaker reel, which I've done, and I'll put a link in the show notes to do that. But he's also the author of the groundbreaking book, Workquake. He's helped scale LinkedIn from 400 to 4,000 employees in just 3.5 years. And since then, he's been advising Fortune 500 companies, top VCs, and in fact, entire governments and world-renowned institutions like Google, like Deloitte, like McKinsey, and others to really navigate the evolving talent landscape, to redefine leadership, and to understand, most importantly, how HR can drive business impact in what is a post-COVID, AI-accelerated, and very disruptive world. So, Steve, without further ado, welcome to the HR L&D podcast. How are you feeling?
Good, Nick. Thanks to having me on the show, and looking forward to the conversation.
So, Steve, I'm going to start with the first question, something I ask all of my guests, which is this: what do the words human resources mean to you?
To me, it means the greatest art form that there is. The art form of coordinating people to achieve something great together. I will say, though, as a caveat, over the course of my career, the identity and the name and the label of human resources seems to have come under attack, that people want to be called, people, talent, people operations. I've heard lots of different names, but, generally it's, for me, when I hear the terms human resources, it's really just the great honor and art form of trying to coordinate people to do something great together.
Fantastic. And you've obviously done that to great success. You effectively built LinkedIn's culture from the ground up during an explosive growth phase, right? So from your perspective, what were some of the foundational decisions that made the difference during that time?
Nick, that experience at LinkedIn was so radically different from anything else I'd ever done in my career. So mostly my experience had been in big companies, tuning what other people had built before me. And what was wonderful about the LinkedIn opportunity was it was like taking your profession down to the studs. And everyone, no matter what you do or where you work, if you have a chance to go and question every assumption around your practice and your profession, it's really healthy. It's very frustrating. But, starting with things in my first week on the job at LinkedIn, should we do performance appraisals? And if we should, what should they look like, and what framework should we use, and what, methodology, and how many should we rate employees? If we do rate employees, on what scale, and how often should we do it? And should we tell the employees what the rating is, and so forth? And I think what was really healthy for me in trying to, understand how to help support an organization in an experience I'd never been in before. I'd never grown a company from nothing, and I'd never built an HR organization from nothing. it was really, really informative to me. And what was healthy for me, and what was really helpful, was having a leadership team that was really supportive and shared ownership of the talent agenda, which was really, really great. So that didn't mean that I had to push. That meant that I was sort of collaborating and building something really great. And the forcing function for us to really focus on culture was the fact that we were a company whose main product was recruiting, and the biggest organizational challenge we had was recruiting. So we used to sit around, and the CEO would say, Steve, if our clients know that we're struggling with recruiting and we're trying to sell a recruiting product, that's not a good look. But it was a real forcing function for us to identify what advantages did we have in recruiting, because we couldn't outpay, we couldn't outbenefit, we couldn't outwork environment, we couldn't outperk Google, Apple, Facebook, all these incredible companies that had massive resources and much better revenue than we did. And so it forced us to sort of really look at ourselves and say, well, what asset do we have? And that asset turned out to be our culture. Like, hey, all we can control is something that really doesn't cost anything but commitment. Like, let's make this the greatest job anyone ever had. And and it seems second nature now, talking about it years in retrospect, but at the time, here we are 6 years in as a company. And one day in a staff meeting, we were really struggling with recruiting. We had our offer acceptance rate was really, really low. And one of the leaders said, well, we are the professional network. We should be the greatest place anyone's ever worked if we're representing professionals as a product, right? If we're going to help you build your professional identity, and help people find their dream job, we should be the dream job. And so that really helped us get focused on who we are. And I say this to a lot of people, our journey building a great culture wasn't born because we're, evolved thinkers about culture is really important. It was out of desperation and out of survival. What assets do we have that can distinguish us in the war for great talent? And that was our culture, and realizing that, hey, we should be a great place to work. And once we got clear on that, it really made it a lot easier for us to go out to the market and say, hey, come here and help people find their dream jobs and make this into your dream job. And that was, again, born from a really, ground level phase in building the function, but also a period of real organization pressure, I guess.
I find it quite interesting because I'm a big believer that we often find our potential when we lead into our fears, right? And it sounds like the fear for LinkedIn was to be seen as someone who couldn't recruit when that's your product. You can't be seen outwardly like that. So we've got to find a solution. It almost sounds as well like the birth of the EVP. Now, you hear EVPs all the time now, the employee value proposition. What makes us different? What is our culture? And yet we still see, even on LinkedIn right now, so many job descriptions just listing a list of tasks and not selling, not storytelling, if you like. And I know that LinkedIn crafted some amazing stories about why it was wonderful to work with the organization as well. And I was very lucky. And this is still a big number, but I used to have the LinkedIn badge of being one of the first million members, which now seems like quite an exclusive club. I know you've been described as a talent hacker. So when you were going through that, what are some of the hacking or disruptive things you did beyond the EVP that started to craft that narrative, to craft that story?
Yeah, let's start with the EVP. One of my beliefs, and maybe this is heresy in some human resource circles, but I believe if you want something to fail in an organization, call it an HR program. Like, that's guaranteed failure. And so what I tried to do was position, whatever our approach was, that this is the leadership and this is the company's approach. This is an HR, speak, or it's an HR program. And we never called our, approach to belief and our vision, mission, values, we never called it an EVP. We just said, this is who we are and this is what we're about. And we didn't believe in culture posters. We just believed in, well, whoever we are shouldn't be something that's on a poster on a wall. It should be something that's really easy to, feel in your heart and understand in your mind. And coming up with simple terms like career transformation was so powerful for us. And I think when we had symmetry between what we're doing in the open market and what we're doing inside, helping people find their dream jobs and helping our employees, build an opportunity to make their own dream job, that harmony of external and internal was so powerful. And I've used that with a lot of clients that I work with now, trying to help them understand when you have that clarity of alignment of internal and external, that really defines who you are. It's so powerful. And you can call it an EVP. And in fact, that's what it is. But we never went to market with this as a EVP, if you will. Right. And so some of the things that we did was we would approach people and say, hey, you're over here in accounting, but all you do is talk about the food trucks that you and your family work on the weekends. Would you like to move from accounting and take over our food service? Or we would say, hey, you're fluent in Japanese, and yes, you're working in business development, but we're growing our new office and our operations in Japan. Would you like to go over there and do that? We tried to be very thoughtful and creative around identifying people that are not, classically trained or don't have the quote unquote experience, and tap them and say, would you like to come over here and try something new and different? We think you can learn it and you can do a great job. And those were some of the hacking that we did, rather than say, you have to be in your job 2 years before you're eligible to apply for another position, which is what I'd done in a lot of prior jobs, right? Because, hey, we've trained you. We can't have you move somewhere else. But when you're in a market where the competition for talent is so fierce, Nick, I mean, Silicon Valley, it is a back alley knife fight for talent. And you know this as someone involved in the recruiting world. There's no more of a competitive landscape than there. And even today, the median tenure, I think, for a software engineer is less than 2 years in Silicon Valley. So you're always looking for an edge. You're always looking for a competitive advantage. And we thought, if we don't really engage our talent, they're going to go find something across the street. So we better really raise our game. And having the LinkedIn tools and resources that we had gave us a little data advantage of trying to do that. The other thing that we did was we studied maniacally who was leaving and why they were leaving. And we looked for insights that we could learn from. Now, I've come around to believe that, employee retention isn't as critical today, building value, as it used to be. But back then, we were really focused on it. And one of the things that we found among engineers was the highest population of people leaving our engineering roles were people who had finished a project. And so we're like, okay, if they're leaving when they finish a project, let's queue up their next project 6 months before this one finishes, so they don't have that sense of completion and it's okay for me to go and I could do something different. We always wanted to engage them. And another thing was we had this group of people that were leaving. We just couldn't find anything in the data that would make any sense. There was no insight in the exit interviews. Like, why are some of these people leaving? And what we found was an accident. Someone in the benefits department said, hey, I've noticed something here, that a lot of our new parents are leaving. So parents who've had their first child seem to be leaving at a higher clip than most other people. And so then that got me thinking, like, oh my gosh, are we not caring for our new parents? Are we working them when they're on maternity leave or paternity leave? This is horrible. No, that wasn't the case. What we found was, talking to a lot of first-time parents, was that their whole ecosystem of decision and value changed when they become a first-time parent. Where they wanted to be, how they wanted to spend their time, just shifted. And those were some of the insights that we were always looking for. When it comes to recruiting, one of the hacking things that we did there was we started listening to all these social media sites where people were posting around where they were and what they were doing. And we started to see, because we're hiring, half of the company at LinkedIn was salespeople. Okay. So one of the hacks that a member of my team discovered was, I can't remember the name of the channel. I don't think it even exists today, but it was something like a Twitter. Someone was posting, hey, I'm here at President's Club with my top performing salespeople, and we're having a great time here in Hawaii or Mexico, wherever it was. And so for those of you who are familiar with President's Club, that's the reward for the highest performing salespeople. So we were always looking for great salespeople. So whenever we would see some company that we respected was having a President's Club with their top salespeople, we would immediately send 2 of our recruiters to that resort. And here's a budget, go to the bar, get to know these people. And we would almost always come away with several candidates. And that's sort of looking at the world a little bit differently from a number of different lenses.
Attention payroll leaders. If you're listening to this, you already know that payroll has never been more complex. Compliance risks are rising, skilled talent is scarce, and getting it wrong can cost your business way more than just money. It can cost you trust, retention, and of course, brand reputation. I'm Nick Day, host of this show and also CEO of JGA Recruitment Group, specialist global payroll recruiters. Here at JGA, we're so passionate about payroll, we've even turned it into music. Don't believe us? Head to your favorite audio platform and search for Payroll Powers the World, and you can quite literally join us in song about how we believe payroll deserves its moment in the boardroom to shine. At JGA, we'd like to think our passion shines through to our recruitment results as well. With a 97% retention rate and an average 19-day job brief to hire success rate, we work fast, we work strategically, and we work with purpose to connect you to the hidden payroll talent that job ads and direct search methods will simply never reach. So if you're hiring or indeed planning to hire, why not partner with the experts that are shaping the future of payroll? Partner with jgarecruitment.com today, or better yet, drop me a message directly, and together we can make sure your next payroll hire is your best one yet. I love that. I mean, my next question was going to be, did you ever take advantage of the data to take advantage of some of your hacks? But it sounds like you definitely did. And actually something that, as my recruiter lens, I find really interesting and insightful was that last point, because I think, I don't want this conversation to be all about LinkedIn. We've got a lot more to talk about in terms of psychology of the workforce. But I think we've got to a point now where people are starting to believe that LinkedIn is the only solution to hiring, and that if we can't find them immediately on LinkedIn, then these people don't exist. And actually, that's not the case. LinkedIn is a wonderful tool, but you still need to have imaginative methods and networks and creative hacking ways to find the best talent. And I think one thing we have established in the current world of work anyway is that actually there's so much noise and it's so easy to contact people that people are less engaged now. And using that example you gave, I could find the same names that you gave in that President's Club and reach out on LinkedIn, and they're probably not going to respond. You need to go to the bar in the location and build that relationship. You can find out who the people are, but the engagement comes from still for me, that real person relationship and trust building. But I'd love to get your take on it.
Yeah, 100% agree with you, Nick. I mean, this is the challenge that LinkedIn's got to face today. And with all due respect, and had a life-changing experience there, their biggest challenge is that their members are polluting the environment, right? And with good intention most of the time, but really thoughtless reach outs. And so your most hunted people get tired of being hunted, and then they go dark and they get off LinkedIn, right? And so there's a lot of phenomenal people who aren't there. Now, listen, LinkedIn solves something that is really great, like access to talent, but it hasn't solved the biggest thing, which I think is the holy grail in the world of recruiting, which is you can help me find people, but I want you to find me the right people. The right people for my company, the right people for my culture, the right people who are going to make a difference for me. We still don't know what that is. We thought back in the day, and I had lots of headhunting firms come to LinkedIn and sort of say, are you going to take us out of a job? I said, I don't think so, because really hard to find talent and real strong efforts to make sure the fit is right on many dimensions is still in play. And it's still up for grabs. I think you're going to have to sharpen your sword, recruiting search firm, to show where your value is, rather than just here's a bunch of people, right? And so,
totally agree.
So that's still there. I would have thought, I left LinkedIn 12 years ago. I would have thought by now we would have more than just an Indeed competitor or just some other insights. And clearly, AI is serving us so much data and possibility, but I haven't seen someone break through yet to really help hone in on finding the right people,
Yeah, I'm still not convinced AI is the answer to that. Maybe I'm a massive advocate for AI in many, many ways, and I'm all for advancing the way that we do things. But I still think, as you said, finding talent for me now is the easy thing.
Yeah.
Engaging that talent, that's way harder.
Right.
And I don't think using robotics or smart intelligence and automations to build that engaging conversation is the answer.
Mm-hmm.
It's still, how do I get hold of you in a way that makes you trust me and pick up the phone and have that conversation? And that's getting harder and harder.
Yeah, I agree.
I think that leads in nicely to a point I wanted to ask you about, which is, you say, and obviously I've been to your website, I've looked at some of your talks, you say that the psychology of the workforce has changed. And so I'm interested to know how leaders maybe listening to this show can meet this moment, can understand how it's changed, so they can adjust and evolve to know how to handle the future.
Yeah, I think the biggest trends that are top of mind for me right now, and let's set AI aside, is the fact that talent can see more opportunity of where they can go, what they can do, how they can apply their skills, education, experience than any moment in history. We have, more transparency to opportunity as a working, community than any time in history. There's more new industries there, which means there's more new career paths, Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, electric scooters, electric cars. Like, these are, industries that are new, and they're serving up new possibilities. Even in agribusiness, I did a presentation to some of the largest John Deere distributors in the world, and they were just saying, hey, we can't hire mechanics because the mechanics that we used to have that would stay their whole lives are seeing that they can use their skills doing hundreds of other things. And so they're struggling too. And, drone operator didn't used to be a job in the agribusiness, and now it's a booming job, right? So that's a challenge for employers that our workforce that used to not see all the possibility now sees lots of possibility. And you add on top of that the need that businesses have for newer skills faster than any time in history. Those are really interesting pressures. So we're seeing higher turnover than we've ever seen. We're seeing more career pivots, not just people leaving companies, but changing career paths than any time since we've been tracking it. And nobody believes that's going to end. So when you're asking me, so what can leaders do to make sense of this and how can we rethink it? Because what's really frustrating for a lot of leaders that I speak with, myself included, is everything that we're taught usually starts in business with the team that stays together the longest is the team that wins, right? And if you ask any business leader today, do you think the trend of people staying shorter and shorter is going to change, that we're going to see people start to in the future stay in organizations longer? Nobody thinks that trend's going to happen, right? That we're going to at best plateau, right? And the global turnover right now, median turnover for knowledge workers is around 4 years, is around the median tenure. But between the ages of 20 and 30, it's 2.5. Okay. So, and that's declining. And so the challenge that I think that we have is to embrace that, is to say, how do I create value in a more fluid workforce? And so let's look to other places where that's happening. And it turns out technology companies, the median tenure for some of the most creative, most innovative, highest performing, and most valuable companies in the world of technology have a median tenure of around 3.5 years for their population. So it's being done. In fact, you could argue that in the world of, let's say, automobiles, the company that's worth more than any other automobile company by a magnitude of 10, Tesla, is worth more than Ford, Honda, Toyota, Mercedes, BMW combined. And they just, haven't even celebrated their 30th birthday. They're run by a guy who's got like 7 part-time jobs, is taking over the world.
Yeah.
And yet they're able to innovate a lot faster than these companies that have been doing it for 100 years. Why? Because they brought in new people, because they have new ways of solving problems. And it's this, in this world of work that's changing really quickly, it turns out bringing in new people and having higher turnover actually can be a competitive advantage. If you don't have enough, you're not bringing in new ways of thinking and new innovations. And that's fundamentally like cognitive dissonance for those of us who are trained classically around what great team success and leadership looks like. Yeah, it's a real moment that we're having.
I like the idea. There's a coaching saying that says, "What got you here won't get you there," and I think there's a lesson there now. If you want to have, we want to be able to embrace the world of job fluidity, you've got to start thinking differently.
Yeah.
And something that I've noticed, even in the short time that we've had together here, Steve, on this show, is when you are giving examples, they often start with lots of questions and curiosity. We have to start with, here's our problem. So how do we do this? What do we do? And that's, I don't think we do that enough at the moment. I think the currency of the future, one of the key attributes of the future is that curiosity is going to help us advance faster.
Yeah.
And I think I had Rich Devine talking, ex-Navy SEAL, on the show a little while ago. And he said, look, Nick, attributes now are critical for the future work. You've got to be curious. You've got to be tenacious. You've got to be persistent. You've got to be these different things. And sometimes they start to outweigh, potentially, depending on the career, of course, that some of the technical skills that may have been valued in the past. I'd love to get your view, because I think from a recruitment lens, when we see people moving in the market, it's often not moving anymore for money. It used to be, certainly when I started in recruitment 20 years ago. Now people are moving for learning opportunities. They're looking for growth opportunities. How do you see it moving? How can organizations take responsibility for trying to retain their staff, and what kind of solutions can they give to make that happen?
Yeah. Listen, the future work right now, the future of AI is probably the scariest marketing campaign in history that's been served to the workforce, right? We're telling people this technology is going to change your jobs. You're going to need to learn new skills. We're going to go through a digital transformation. We're going to go through an AI transformation. And so where I think it's what that pressure is creating unintentionally is that talent is loyal to learning more than anything else. Like, if you're not making me better for the future, why would I stay here? Because your company, we might get disrupted, we might get taken out. Could be a competitor that, disrupts our business. So all I want from you is a promise that you're going to make me better. And in a world where we know this new skills are going to be needed, tomorrow, here's a compelling thought that I've thought a lot about this, and I don't know what the right percentage is here, but I'm going to lay it out there, and I'm curious what other listeners think and what you think. I believe sometime in the next 5 years, we're going to hire people more based on what they can learn than what they know. And maybe it's 50-50, right? Because I know your job's going to change. I know I'm going to need to morph my company strategy. And I know that my competitive advantage is my ability to adapt to an increasingly unpredictable and uncertain world of work. So I need to know that you can learn quickly. You're a self-starter. You're curious. You have a growth mindset, like you're saying. I think that's a real bedrock for what we're talking about. And for me, what I think is the challenge that faces to realize that outcome. And by the way, I'm not going to go on a rant about universities and schools not preparing the workforce. I deal with a lot of universities. Business is not clear on what they need. So the university is like, well, what do you want us to prepare? Like, we're not sure. Just, future skills. Like what? And so I think every business is going to need to become a business school. And what's disabling that from happening quickly is that most business plans are built for most employees to deliver an output, right? Like 90% of what your time right now is, you need to deliver output. Yeah. I don't have discretionary time for you to take on a new project that you don't know anything about, or for you to take a month in Costa Rica to learn some new skill. I've got to have you deliver. And that's short-sighted. And that's why I think a lot of leaders think we've got the problem that they have is recruiting. I said, no, it's not. The problem that you have is skills are morphing. The need for new skills is morphing faster than you've ever been prepared for. And you've not built a system that grows your people. You build a system that says, oh, I need new skills. I'm going to go to the open market. So look at most of the technology companies in the last year doing something we've never seen before, letting a bunch of people go and recruiting aggressively at the same time. It's usually put the brakes on, freeze the recs. We got to let some people go, cut costs. Now you're seeing brakes on, talent, sort of skills, like, hey, we need to move these people out. We need to get some new people in. And that's sort of, again, cognitive dissonance to the kind of practice that we've seen before. And I think it's a failure to recognize that we're going to need to invest in growing our people, because we're not going to win in the open market. With more people changing careers, more people leaving companies, and more people uncertain of where they should be working, I think the supply of talented, qualified people is not going to grow. And so that means for recruiters, we're used to a universe, let's say 15 years ago, Nick, high degree of confidence we could find someone 90% qualified for the job spec. Today, you're lucky if it's 60, 65%.
Yeah.
So who's going to fill that 35, 40%? You? Somewhere else? Or are you going to take, what would you rather do? Have 9 months to fill a search, or fill someone internally within a month and upskill them for 6 months? What would you rather have? The internal movement, right?
I've got a question then. I don't know if we're falling into a bit of a trap here. Maybe we're in a bit of a dichotomy in how we manage this, because we've also post-COVID, and obviously you've got a wonderful book all about this called Workquake, it's called Embracing the Aftershocks of COVID-19 to create a better model of working. There'll be a link in the show notes for that for those that are interested in getting a copy. But what COVID did do is it rapidly accelerated the ability to work globally from anywhere, from home. Now, what I've seen shift from my recruitment lens is that means we've moved into much more of an output-led leadership model, where I don't care when you're online, but I do care that the work is done by this point. Does that potentially work in opposition then to that learning culture? Because leaders aren't always looking for or providing that learning journey, because they're trying to provide an output-led structure that says, hey, I don't want to be micromanaging you. I want you to manage your own time and have your work-life balance. And the Great Resignation proved that's what people need. So you just get the work done. So how do we get that balance? It's just a question that came to me when you were giving that response. Is that in opposition, or can they work in harmony?
Well, listen, I would like to say that the hybrid work from home tsunami that really, presented itself in a way that we never seen before during COVID was going to hold, but it is being reversed at a rapid clip right now.
It is.
The number of postings for remote and hybrid work have dropped dramatically on all the job platforms. The number of companies that are publicly saying come back in. I was talking to my sister yesterday. She was hired before the pandemic to be fully remote. And her company said, you need to come in 2 days a week. And she said, why? And they said, the best line ever, because we said so. Well, why? Because, and there's a reckoning. So for me, it's all about, I agree with you. It's all about value creation, and where someone does that. I think what we're starting to learn now is most leaders were trained to lead with proximity leadership style. Like, I need to see you doing it, and I need to know you're here. And I'm worried about our culture dissolving, and I'm worried about teamwork, because I know when we're together, we could do this. When we're apart, I don't know. And so we're in that making of the sausage moment. And I think it's rare. It does happen, but it's more rare, Nick. I think you would agree with this, that you have a leader who's very confident that you can deliver when you're remote, more so than you're confident when I'm in the room with you. Like that level of maturity, I think, is a little bit more rare than I wish it were. But it is, we are having a reckoning moment right now where this is sort of like coming to the fore, like, hey, do you believe that can happen or not? Because if you do, your access to talent is so much greater, right? The supply and the capability of people you can hire, if you don't care where they are and when they work or what time zone they're in, your opportunity, funnel is much, much bigger. But we're still in this really hard place. And I've been hired by middle management to several Fortune 100 companies to help them convince senior management that they shouldn't have to go back to the office, really just to help put an argument together. And where I usually start is, ask yourself, why does management want you back there? Like, look at it from their lens. Like, their board and their investors are saying, you better deliver results. And they don't know if the culture is going to be better when we're remote, if teamwork is going to be better. And we don't have a lot of long proof yet. We've got some encouraging signs that profits were not hurt when people went remote, right? And a lot of companies did better and realized, hey, we can operate like this. And a lot of employees said, hey, my productivity is not just better when I'm at home. My life is better when I'm at home. And so not everybody, right? Like, my son had a summer internship from home in college, and he's like, this is a nightmare. I want to be meeting people, like, I do not want to be sitting here behind a computer all summer, Dad. I'm like, I know. So it doesn't work for everyone. And that's a whole nother, the hybrid conversation is a whole nother one to have.
So I think some of it's an unfair metric, and I'll tell you for why. And I'd love to get your view on this. Maybe I'm outdated in the way that I say this, but I think post-COVID, and obviously the world of work has changed significantly since COVID, but that was, as you say, that was what accelerated people working from home. And I think, though, also, number one is people needed to prove the model. So the productivity didn't just go up because they're working from home. They went up because people wanted to prove to their bosses and their leaders that they could work from home, that they were valued, and actually, my job is not at risk in the COVID times. If there are going to be cuts made, I don't want it to be me. I need to prove to everybody so that I can sustain this model into the future. But I think over time, then, when that has been sustained and people have given that long-term approval, the natural human tendency is we start to take a little bit more adjustment. We perhaps don't put it in quite as much as we did when we first started. Maybe I'm being unfair to the human race here, maybe, but I think there's been a little bit less commitment to the model now than there was immediately after COVID. And I do think for some, they're not as committed to proving the model as they were, and it's now contracted that they don't have to prove it anymore. So I think we've seen a little bit. I actually think we've seen a drop in productivity, but also we've got an economic landscape that's turbulent, which means that now you've got the investors saying, hey, look, profits have dropped. Maybe it's because let's get them back in the office and try and prove it the other way. There's quite a few things happening at the same time.
Yeah. I could argue this from both sides. I don't necessarily disagree with you. I'm an extrovert. I like being in groups. I like being in high energy environments, but I also recognize that I have some really good thinking when I'm by myself, whether I'm walking or just thinking or even having a conversation with someone without being in a pressure environment. I have that capacity. I've been thinking a lot, Nick, the last week or so, and just like everyone, probably listeners here, I'm just trying to make sense of this artificial intelligence tsunami that we're all facing right now. And so much of the conversation about AI is about productivity. And I think we need to hit pause on that. And I was reading some articles yesterday about this that really got me thinking that, productivity is important. Don't get me wrong. And that's the train of every other advancement of technology we've seen prior to AI. Go faster, do more, cost less. That's a worthy aspiration, right? What business leader doesn't want to achieve that? But are we sacrificing creativity? Are we sacrificing innovation? Like if that's what like all the brain research and all the wellness research that we're seeing right now is the more you sleep and the less you're having to just churn, the more creative and innovative you're thinking. And I had an opportunity to speak to some of the biggest investors in brain science and brain health, and the biggest or the most invested in startups in that space a few months ago in Portugal. And I asked them, I said, what does the research say about optimal number of days to work in a week and optimal amount of sleep? And they said, you need 8 to 10 hours of sleep a night, and 3 days is probably the optimal number of days that you should work in a week. So then I said, how many of you here work 3 days a week? And they said 0, and so we got to figure this out. There's a lot of pressure. I have an ongoing debate with one of my colleagues around, is the 4-day work week really going to be realized, or the 3-day work week? And he's like 100% yes. I said, no, it won't. It won't, because any investor, if you tell an investor, hey, we're doing so well, we're only going to go to 3 days a week, they're going to say, no, use the other 2 days and let's go after a new market, or let's build a new product. Right. And I don't see that. And that's a powerful influence in how work gets structured. So, it's just a really interesting, this productivity conversation. We really need to think about this, because AI can deliver so much more than just faster and less money, and we're seeing, what makes me sad as a talent leader is most of the first implementations of AI are being used to cut headcount, not to make jobs more interesting, not to create new verticals, not to discover new ways of, going after a different market. That's the real power of what AI can deliver. Maybe 10% or 5% of what AI can do is like cut costs. Like, come on. And so, and just like I had a great conversation with a friend. I have a lot of friends who are recruiters, and they asked me the question. This is why we're stuck in this moment with AI and recruiting. Just imagine, if you're thinking about AI and you're a recruiter, the first question you're going to ask is, how can I use AI to do recruiting better? And my answer to that, we had a debate, a friend of mine and I the other day, I said, that's the wrong question, because you're confining yourself into how you do recruiting now and trying to see how can AI fit into that. The right question should be, how can I solve recruiting differently? And see, that's fundamentally threatening to a human being. Like, well, maybe I'm not going to be needed if I come up with a different way of doing this. And it just follow this line of thinking. If you ask AI, how can I solve AI recruiting differently? It's going to ask you, well, what is recruiting? And you're going to say, well, it's bringing in new skills, talents, and abilities. And then AI is going to probably ask you, well, what skills, talents, and abilities do you have in your organization right now? And that's where you're going to go, oh, I don't really know. I knew what their CV was and their LinkedIn profile is, but do I really know the depth of the skills, talents, and abilities of the people I have now? And the answer is no. So then AI is going to say, well, maybe that's your problem, skill awareness, right? Or talent awareness. And that gets back to, we're constrained by our own thinking. And I think that's a missed opportunity. We're going to have to really, that's when I look at AI, this moment is more of a cultural challenge, honestly, Nick, than a technical one.
I think you raise a really
wired for it.
A really interesting point. Everyone I've seen, pretty much everything I've seen is all about how it can improve, as you said, the problem of productivity. How can we improve productivity? How can we do more with less? I'm not seeing many cases even on LinkedIn or reports or articles being written about how we're using AI to treat our employees better. How we're using AI to improve our values and our culture, to improve work-life balance. It all seems to be outward thinking. What can we do to make it cheaper, rather than how can we improve the experience for the workforce we already have? And I think that's an interesting challenge we're going to need to overcome. But obviously, you've worked with governments, you've worked with major corporations, you worked at LinkedIn. I mentioned a few before: McKinsey, Deloitte, Harvard, even. What's a moment within all of that work you've done that's really left a lasting impression on you? I think it'd be a nice way to bring to light to audience.
Yeah, I think I've got an example that I think would be really fun to share with you and the audience, of a company that really blew me away. So a few months ago, I'm on a panel in London. The CEO of an insurance company, American insurance company, Prudential, is on there, and I'm railing around how disappointed I am about AI and how we're aiming too low and we need to think bigger. And he said, listen, let me share with you a problem that we solved with AI. They were trying to solve a turnover problem. And so they said, a lot of people are leaving and they could have done another job in the company. They didn't know it, and we didn't know it. So what can we do to improve that? So we challenged his team. They leveraged AI. They leveraged their learning management system. They leveraged LinkedIn. They leveraged employee data, and came up with a program that they're still iterating on. But imagine this: the first day that you start the job at Prudential, they sit you down and serve you a dashboard of how qualified you are for every single job in the company.
Oh,
Not
wow.
just your career family, not just the PR arc, the financial, an accounting arc, not just the HR arc. Here's how qualified you are for every job in the company based on what we know. If we're missing information, please give it to us. But we don't know where you want to go, what you want to do, but it's probably not staying doing the same thing for a long period of time. And so what we're going to do is show you your 20%. It's like a graph, anywhere from 0 to 100%. And if you're like in the 50, 60 range and you want to be, considered a candidate, we can help get you to 70%. Here's people you can talk to. Here's some coaching. Here's some mentoring. Here's some online learning. That just blew my mind of what's possible. And why doesn't every single company, I never built it, so I'm not pointing fingers. Why doesn't every single company deliver that to their employees? It seems like a no-brainer. And here it was just sitting, an insurance company came up with it. I'm like, and they were trying to, again, they're under stress, solving a problem with high turnover. And like, we got to look at this problem differently. That I think is a sign of hope and a sign of, how we can use AI to serve a more beautiful career experience for our people, right?
It's a great example. I think the last couple of sponsors have really emphasized the importance of self-reflection and space. If we're always going at things, we don't have that opportunity sometimes to lift our heads up and think about a problem strategically or creatively. I love the idea that, I don't know if you're into Formula One racing, but a Formula One race is won and lost in the pits. That's the one time these aerodynamically, beautifully, highly engineered machines, if they don't go in the pits, they don't finish the race. And that's the moment they have to take to breathe, to change tires, to get themselves ready. And I just think you've highlighted that as a really important aspect for the HR leaders listening to this. As you say, ask a different type of question. Think about something with a lateral mindset, maybe. What got you here won't get you there. How else could you be asking the question in a different way? As you very articulately put in relation to the recruitment question. It's an interesting.
And I'll just say, it just sort of nail this home. The greatest moment that, or the greatest opportunity that AI is serving us is the recognition that human skills have never been more important. Communication, empathy, reading body language, chemistry of teams. Like, these are super powerful skills, and human resources, like, this is our wheelhouse, right? This is our wheelhouse. And AI, the more it takes away the rote sort of automated stuff that we've been doing, it serves us the opportunity for us to really shine a light on the most powerful skills that we have, right?
Couldn't agree more. And a fantastic way to finish today's episode. Steve Cadigan, thank you ever so much for joining me on the HR L&D podcast. For listeners who want to find out more, please do go to stevecadigan.com. There will be a link in the show notes. You can actually find a number of his other talks. There's a speaker reel there as well. I definitely recommend you go to that and have a listen. There's some really, really inspirational talks and other resources you can access on the site. I'll put a link into the LinkedIn profile and, of course, to your book, Workquake, as well, for those who want to grab themselves a copy. But Steve, thank you ever so much for joining me today on the show. And, of course, if you've enjoyed today's episode, please remember to follow, subscribe, and most importantly, share it with all of your HR, people management, and L&D professionals and friends. And we can really raise the profile of global HR for everyone across the world. So thank you ever so much. Managing a global team is complex, but Deel makes it simpler with payroll, HR, IT, and compliance all in one place. That's why over 35,000 businesses trust Deel to hire, pay, and manage teams worldwide. See how Deel works at DEEL.com/NICKDAY. That's Deel.com/Nick Day. Deel, your forever people platform.